Welcome to episode 3 of my narrative inquiry. What does it mean to be Acadian? In today's episode, we are interviewing Tyler LeBlanc from Nova Scotia.
I now live in Lunenburg, and I've spent time in Halifax, and I've spent some time outside of Canada as well. Um, I grew up not knowing anything about the history behind my last name or about Acadian history really whatsoever, and it's something I've only come to learn about through my own research and a lot of other people's research that's helped me along the way to kind of discover my connection to this past that was unfortunately lost in my family.
So what propelled you to discover your Acadian heritage? Or what was that moment where you were like, oh, I identify as an Acadian?
Uh, I mean, it really came from my last name was the first. I was spending time in Cape Breton, particularly in Camp. I was working as a bike tour guide, so taking people around the Cabot Trail, and one of the guides I work with quite often was from Camp, and we were hanging out one evening, and he asked me who I was related to in town because my name's really very common in that part of Cape Breton, and I was kind of confused. I didn't know of any connections to that community. I didn't know of any family members around, and it got me thinking. Naively, so I just had never really thought about the connection between my last name being LeBlanc, LeBlanc being a very common Acadian last name. And it was just something that was never brought up in our household. Never talked about where I grew up. There weren't a lot of families with French last names or Acadian last names, so there was no real community you know whatsoever. And so that question kind of blindsided me, and it made me think. As someone who had studied history and studied writing, I was immediately inquisitive. How do I figure this out? What there must be something to this, and so I started doing research into why I didn't know anything about what was seemingly a pretty obvious connection.
So being having that Acadian last name and growing up in a community that didn't have other Acadian last names, I can assume you grew up in a Anglophone community then
Entirely.
entirely. So did you speak or have any French around at all growing up?
Absolutely zero. I mean, we had the general French that you get in school, but I don't think my French teachers even spoke French. It was a very your typical Anglo core French program. It kind of just did it to get by, and then you were able to. I think that lasted until grade 7 or grade 8, and then you had to choose to go into French immersion if you wanted to continue, and there was no push to do that, and so I kind of took the easy option and didn't go in French immersion, but there was no French in the community or at home.
Okay. So that's really definitely interesting and adds to the complexity of your last name being LeBlanc in the middle of a, Anglophone community, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
so what do you do now? What do you do for a living?
I'm an author and a bookseller. I work at a little bookstore here in Lunenburg, so I write books and I sell books.
So you did you want to tell us a little bit about the types of books that you are currently writing about or that you have written?
Sure. Well, I have one published book at the moment. Hopefully more to come. But my first book was essentially me trying to find an answer to the question we just talked about. Why did I know nothing about this? What is the connection? And I just wanted to find out, what was this history that I came to learn had unfortunately been lost only quite recently in my family. Um, and so the book is kind of my journey to answer these questions, but it's told through the perspective of my distant ancestors as they moved through the expulsion and ended up in various different places, one of which being Cape Breton, which is where my grandparents are from. And so I used their journeys through the expulsion to kind of tell the story of the expulsion. It's almost like I was telling it to myself, educating myself on this history that is really, unfortunately, not very present in the school system around here. And so the book is an expulsion story, kind of leading up to me being displaced from that history. So kind of mirroring those two things.
So I can also agree that the information that we have in the school system about Acadians, at least in my experience, was very limited. It seems like it was only, half a page in our sciences sociales, and that was it. So yeah, it was a moment, very brief moment in social studies, and then I remember thinking, oh, this is us. How come we're not talking about this more? But it was just a blurb, and then we kind of moved on to the next thing. So I wouldn't be surprised to find out that that's similar across Canadian social study classes. But
Yeah, it was a very brief mention in my school, kind of like there were some people here and then they left. The end.
so at that time when you were in school, would you have identified with those individuals as being um, part of your ancestry at all?
No, I had no idea. We were told in our family that that our ancestors had come from France and settled in Louisbourg, um, and that was the family story. That was a really long time ago, and that was that. So it's almost like I wouldn't say it was actively denied. I don't think it was withheld from us for any reason. I think it was just kind of over the years had faded and was just not talked about. And then another story was created to fill its place,
Yeah.
maybe through kind of shame of losing touch. As far as I can tell, the family, my grandfather grew up in Louisbourg, and his father lived in Sydney, but had moved to Sydney from Marguerite, Belcourt, Cheticamp area, and that's when the family, I think, kind of lost its connection. Started speaking English to work in the steel industry, and then by the time my grandfather had been raised, my grandfather's parents were French speaking, but he left home at a very early age and never returned. And I think he kind of turned his back on all of that to make his own life as a child of the war generations. I think when he came back from war, he set out to make his own future and didn't look back.
Yeah. And it sounds like there's definitely more opportunities to advance in English because you're not a bilingual province, so there wouldn't have been certain opportunities that there are in New Brunswick. So
Yeah, I think like particularly in Cape Breton, in the like early 20th century, if you wanted to advance or move into any sort of job, particularly in like the primary industries, they wanted you to speak English. So it seems that a lot of families kind of had to assimilate to survive.
all right, so let's dive into some of the questions that I had so that you can help me progress in my research a little further, and we'll learn more about you and the process here. So my first question is extremely broad, but I like to ask it because I feel it allows everyone to kind of bring their own um, flavor and answers to the question. So it's, what does it mean to be Acadian?
I think for me, and this is something that I've struggled with and tackled for the last 6 years since I started writing the book and really coming to learn anything about this or about this component of my history. And it was something I was really nervous about, feeling, like I didn't grow up in an Acadian community. I didn't grow up with any Acadian culture. I don't speak French. And then here I am finding this history and connecting, feeling connected to it and interested in it and interested in knowing more about it. But does that allow me to be considered an Acadian? It's a question I don't think I fully have an answer to yet, but um, just learning, getting to tour around with the book and go to different events and speak about the book, I've got to meet a lot of really interesting people who I would say are, you know, true Acadians, way more Acadian than me in my eyes. And having interesting conversations with them about this same question, um, and getting and feeling a lot of warmth and acceptance from these people and excitement to get to hear my story and my experience and learning that it's a very multifaceted experience. And so I guess what it means to me to consider myself Acadian would be being part of this very this um, being part of a very diverse group of people who have a shared history, but because of that, the complexities of that shared history have grown into people who are very different and have very different experiences now, 300 almost 300 years after the expulsion, a very fundamental event in all of our histories. Um, and so to me, to be an Acadian is to be a part of that history and be a modern result of that complex history, and to add to and try to promote Acadian culture in any way I can to help feel and become more of a part of a community that I have not always felt part of. Uh, and that's kind of how I see my experience of considering myself Acadian to be, is to not compare myself to people who have a completely different experience, but to think that if we have the same goal and we have no control over how we got to where we are, but if we have the same goal of celebrating and helping Acadian culture grow, then we're working on the same goal.
Yeah, to be an ambassador of Acadian culture. And um, I feel that um, for myself, that's something that's really important in my own personal life. And that's why doing the research and working with students and teaching them when they're interested about, learning about Acadian culture, taking those opportunities to teach classes in the evening, I think um, is really important, because we are the ambassadors of who are the Acadians. And when people have questions, they want to go to Acadians for the answers. And it's important to have people that are there willing to share their personal experiences. Like, this conversation today can help future people asking that question, understanding what it means to be Acadian as well. Um, so this might be an interesting question, because as you mentioned before, you didn't consider yourself Acadian in your youth, but the question is this different than what you thought in your childhood? So could you tell me what you thought about Acadians in your youth?
I mean, I knew very, very little. Like I said, what we learned in school was very little. I didn't really leave the area I grew up in a lot. I'm from a very small place, and we didn't travel around the province much. Um, maybe a few times I'd been to the Valley or had been to Cape Breton and was aware of there being French communities, uh, and not really knowing how an Acadian community was different from another French Canadian community without any understanding of the history or the differences between the two groups. And being a kid, I didn't really know how that was different. Um, like, so yeah, I really came from a very like sheltered and ignorant uh, area in terms of really it was never talked about, and that's not like necessarily an excuse, but just really didn't know.
Yeah. Well, if you didn't have a lot of opportunities to learn about it or talk about it, then it wouldn't, you know, it's not something you see, so you don't, you just, it's not something you think about.
Yeah.
So this next question, I feel like you might have more of a response to because um, it's more directly tied to your own personal experiences. Are English Acadians less Acadian due to assimilation? And can you please explain your answer?
And this has been at the core uh, of my that been on my mind for a long time. I would say that like as being an Anglophone, uh, I do feel like I am less Acadian than Francophones. I feel like I'm missing out on a major component uh, of what it means to be Acadian, even though I've had many people tell me that that's, it's not just the language component, but it's hard not to feel that way. Um, I guess the question is, do I think English Acadians are less Acadian due to assimilation? Is that the question? Uh, I mean, I think yes. It's hard not to think that. I mean, at least I can only really speak to my family's experience or what I've learned of it. But it seems that they're kind of a classic example of a family assimilating into Anglo Nova Scotian culture, for whatever reason, uh, and to such an extent that we had no idea of this history until I went out and looked for it myself. And no one in my family, other than myself, I think, thinks like would identify with their Acadian heritage or have considered it. And so, yeah, I mean, my family is definitely less Acadian because of assimilation.
Do you have any individuals in your close life and your family that are now identifying as Acadian thanks to um, the information that you've brought forward and what you've been sharing with individuals?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if they think much. They would have put a lot of thought into how they identify. I mean, my mom mentioned being interested in getting an Acadian license plate for her car, so that that was something. But I mean, it certainly made them think about it. But I'm not sure what how they would identify.
So, do you think that because they don't identify as strongly as you, that it makes you less Acadian in any capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty far on the fringe, because of many factors. So it's not hard for me to feel less than. Um, but uh, yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that your feelings around that would ever change?
Yeah, I mean, they have over the years, even from when I first started publicly sharing the book around. I was definitely a lot more. I was, afraid of what the reception was going to be, but I've gotten to meet so many wonderful people through the book, and have really learned that, like, in my mind, what I guess I have as kind of the archetype Acadian was kind of like this fantasy that I had created, and that I've met hundreds of different people from across the Maritimes and the northeastern United States, and people from Louisiana and people from France and England who identify with their Acadian background to many different degrees, and that's kind of helped me understand the diversity and complexity of the community, and so that's made me feel more of a part of it. I know the there's this Acadian that I think of, and I'm never going to be that, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have no part in the community.
So this perfect Acadian that you speak of, um, does this mean that the other individuals will also never be able to achieve this if they're coming from places where they don't have that strong Acadian identity?
No, I think like meeting them helped me realize that that perfect thing doesn't exist, and there is no one Acadian. There's thousands of different unique experiences that have created a bunch of different people who have a very similar background.
Yeah. Yeah. I, from my own personal story, I never understood why my mother's family didn't identify as Acadian. Um, a few generations ago, they assimilated into English, Catholic married into Protestant, and they changed the last name from Savoy to Savoy. And they were no longer part of the French community at that point. So they continued their life, and I think the decision was kind of made right then and there. We're no longer part of that community, and for us to move forward, we need to identify with the English community. So that's what happened. And my father's family stayed very French, and he didn't really learn English until he was in high school and had to start learning English to talk to the girls in the next neighborhood, right? Like the
Hmm.
next community over. So um, I just always kind of questioned why do you feel less Acadian? Because it's the history, and it's the same history. It's just that at one point your story took another direction and evolved to, assimilate in order to survive.
Hmm.
Whereas other Acadians had opportunities where they didn't necessarily have to make those same choices. So, but I
Yeah,
also feel a lot of growing up, there was a lot of shame because felt like I was never going to be that perfect Acadian that you talk about, right? Because I felt like
yeah,
that was something that I was never going to achieve it because I was always too English or too, you know, too bilingual or too, just not in the right community or not using the right words. Something
yeah.
like there was always something, some reason to just feel inadequate. But
Hmm.
um, so the next question that I have for you, and this one I don't know if you'll have much of an answer for. But it's, did you have fewer opportunities as an Acadian and why?
Yeah, I don't. Sorry, cats. No, I don't think that's so relevant to my situation. I don't think it's played a role in uh, in my access to anything. Um, yeah.
Has it added opportunities?
Uh, I mean, it's added opportunities to meet a lot of really interesting people through the book. I mean, the book has really given me a chance to feel a part of something that I hadn't before. So yeah, I would say it's given me, I wouldn't say opportunities in the sense of, like financial or career opportunities, but social opportunities in terms of just feeling like I'm part of something, and have, access to to some people who I probably would have never met had I not met them through the book.
And my next question, uh, I'm just reading it here. It's, do you have few opportunities due to language barriers? So when I wrote this question, I was originally thinking of it from the point of view of someone that speaks French having issues accessing whatever because maybe you have to assimilate to make advancements. But it could also be seen on the flip side, whereas someone that's already, their family's already assimilated, do you feel that you've had fewer opportunities because of the language barriers to not being a francophone?
I mean, in terms of access to jobs that require being bilingual, yeah, I mean, sure. I guess I have fewer opportunities in that realm. Not speaking French has been a barrier to that, but I wouldn't say that's not within like a blame environment. I don't feel like I've lost out. I mean, I think it's a great shame that our family lost the French language and I didn't get to grow up with French, but there's no blame associated with that. It's just an unfortunate consequence of history and assimilation. And so, yeah, have there been some jobs I wanted to apply for that I probably would have had a better chance of getting if I spoke French? Sure, but I don't feel like that's something that was taken away from me necessarily, because there's lots of bilingual people with great qualifications that got those jobs.
Yeah. So that's an interesting perspective that you have there, because I know New Brunswick, some folks feel very strongly still about our whole bilingual, um, you know, English versus French is still very much a thing here, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Um, so my last question is, what was or is your biggest challenge as an Acadian?
uh I think my biggest challenge is something we've kind of already spoken about, is just feeling like you've mentioned, like this kind of doubt over whether I have the right to identify with this group, or am I too Anglo or too non-Acadian? Is just having the the family heritage and the name enough, or is it too far gone to? And so I guess that would be a personal challenge within myself, to feel whether you know I deserve to be a part of this community, which is something that, again, like I've mentioned, the book and then getting to travel around with the book has really helped find some answers to that question, which I
So,
do think I do have the right to feel a part of this community.
so what communities have you traveled with your book?
uh just, I mean, in around Nova Scotia, Shedda Camp, outside of Bedeck, along the South Shore. I haven't got to spend much time down on the French shore of Nova Scotia yet, which is too bad. I hope to get down there. Um, New Brunswick has mainly just been like Sackville, Moncton, and Fredericton for book events. And then in Maine, I get a really interesting connection with the Franco-American Studies Department at the University of Maine. Um, and so I got to meet a lot of folks at an event there at their campus in Orono, and then another virtual event at their campus at Fort Kent. Um, and through research, met some people in PEI. But that's it.
Nice. So you definitely have been meeting folks from all over the place then.
Yeah, so that's been neat.
And are you finding any commonality amongst the individuals that you're meeting?
A shared interest in history and genealogy has been a pretty, but I mean, that's also my book's about history and genealogy. So the people who come to the events are generally going to be interested in that as well. But it seems to be a pretty classically Acadian interest. I mean, it's our connection. Uh, Another commonality has been people just really interested to hear someone else's story, and relate it to their own experience. And it's just been a really positive. Every conversation has just been really kind of nice. This feeling of very distant cousin bonding. I'm just like, oh, that there's like one part of that story reminded me of this story my great grandfather used to tell at his kitchen table, and there just seemed to be some latent relatability, um, that I found interesting.
Yeah, and it's definitely a very um, familiar, I find, when we're having conversations amongst folks from Acadians from different areas. Um, and it's really common for people to, as you had mentioned, your tour guide friend asked who you're related to, right?
Mhm.
It always goes back to trying to find those family ties, who you're related to, who who's your father, who's your father's father,
Yeah.
and how far back, these connections go. And uh, it was definitely very common in my childhood. As soon as I would introduce myself to someone, it was uh, they'd ask who's your father? So qui est ton père? And then I'd say um Palimil Savoie, and then they'd say Palimil à qui? So Palimil, like who? Uh, right? Like who's his uh, who's his dad? So I'd say Palimil à Romeo. So and then they're like, and then I'd still have to tell them usually like a third generations are like, "Oh, Romeo," and then they'd ask like another question, and then I'd say, "No, Romeo Adolphe." So uh, I'd have to go Parimil, Romeo Adolphe for them to understand who I was. And then when I would say Adolphe, they would normally stop there because my great grandfather owned a general store, so people knew who he was.
Hmm.
And I didn't usually have to explain beyond that one. Sometimes they would ask, "Who's your uncle?" Because my dad came from a huge Catholic, French Catholic family of um, 18. So there was nine
Oh,
boys and nine girls. Yeah. So
wow.
sometimes they didn't know my dad, but they knew one of his brothers or sisters. So yeah.
I had a funny experience recently. There's a little plaque, and monument down near Annapolis Royal, Port Royal, where they believe the LeBlanc family originally settled when they came over from France. And they have a little information booth there. And I had never visited it. And so I was standing there looking at it, and this man came up on a lawn tractor, and he asked me what my name was. And then he asked me not who my father was, but which of the sons of the original couple I was related to. And it kind of felt like an interesting question, like, do you know? Do you know 12 generations back which one of these names on the sign is your link? It was it was fun, uh, and I luckily I did know the answer. And then he's like, "Oh, me too." And so we're cousins at least 12 generations ago. And it's something has happened more than once in meeting another LeBlanc, where it's especially when we're not from the same community or the same province or the same country. It's like not who's your father, who's your grandfather. It's who's your 12 times grandfather.
Yeah. And I definitely have met a lot of folks with the last name LeBlanc. Where I grew up, there was a lot on the Acadian Peninsula, so I feel probably similar to my last name, Savoie. There's were spread all over. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, Néguac has it's Capitale de Savoie, so there's more, I'm guessing, there than anywhere else. But there was a couple of Savoie brothers that came over, and we're all supposed to be related to the brothers somehow. So
this is
I guess
a
more
funny
story.
this is a funny time to ask this question, but I know of someone who is from your part of New Brunswick whose last name is Savoie, and I wonder if you know them.
Sure, what's their name?
Joan Blake Savoie,
Um,
who would live in Dalhousie.
no, I don't think I know any Savoies from Dalhousie. Most of my relatives that uh, are around Moncton, Dieppe area, or have moved to Montreal.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
a lot of,
just had to ask since we're on the topic.
yeah, there are a lot of Savoys though. So, like I had mentioned, they also anglicized into Savoy, so there's a lot of Savoys too.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much for taking the time tonight to meet with me and let me ask you these questions and pick your brain on some stuff. And I hope you don't mind. I might have some, follow-up questions down the road, and might want to
Yeah.
be, you had mentioned you had perhaps a contact from Newfoundland as well. Um, so I'd like to follow up on that and more inquiries that I can add to this research, I think would be awesome, because I don't know anyone myself from Newfoundland, but I have found some old videos on YouTube of some people in Newfoundland speaking French
Hmm.
and telling some stories, but it's very dated, like 1970s. So, um, yeah, and some of the language is really not appropriate. So when I'm trying to show it to students in class, I just say like, here, so we're gonna watch like this clip because this, like, I know is not going to offend anyone. Um,
Yeah,
but
let me know, and I have a friend who's in in the francophone community in Newfoundland, and he would know lots of. Uh, I'm sure he'd be able to point you in the direction of someone, particularly with a Acadian Newfoundland connection.
yeah, because I mean, I'm interested in trying to connect with Acadians from all over Nova Scotia, right? Or Nova Scotia, North America. I want to make sure that I get a nice rounded perspective of and it's really making me realize that my questions when I first started um, asking myself, like, what it means to be Acadian, these questions, excuse me, I have the hiccups, these additional questions came based off of stemming off of that original question with the help of my professor. But it's made me realize that some of the questions get interpreted differently depending on people's backgrounds and experiences. And everyone's story is so unique that I was so focused on what I thought for sure people's answers were, possibly going to be based on the
Hmm.
types of questions that I was asking. But the first and the last questions I find are the most interesting for the responses I'm getting, and that's where I'm finding commonalities between what people are saying, like the feeling of cousins and that feeling of connection and feeling of being an ambassador of culture. So it's really, um, positive that I'm seeing that because it's encouraging to me. I'm like, okay, yeah, this feeling that I have is like this is the same feeling other Acadians are experiencing too, even
Yeah.
if might be having an identity crisis of what it what it means to be Acadian, but we still have some similarities there. So that's um really refreshing to see. And thankfully I didn't cough too much during the interview, so it should turn out all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're sick. That sucks.
Yeah,
And thanks for including me. It's like made me it's yet another chance for me to think about these questions, and like I've said, it's stuff I've been thinking about for years now, and it's nice to get to talk about it and hear your perspective and hear those commonalities that are starting to come out of your research. They're nice to hear.
yeah, and it's I feel it's important for us to both continue to do the type of work that we're doing to help encourage other people that are in wondering the same questions as us to, help help other Acadians out. And
Hmm.
those that even um, aren't Acadian that are just wondering what it who are the Acadians, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really an important thing that I've learned teaching over the last decade is so many people would come to my courses just out of pure interest on what Acadians are, and some of them had never heard of Acadians before until reading the write up of the class. And these are folks that are living in New Brunswick because most of the time the courses when I was teaching before COVID were on campus. So this
Hmm.
was on campus at the University of New Brunswick. I did in St. John as well as Fredericton. And these people sometimes were government employees and they didn't really know the history behind it and the
Wow.
people they were dealing with every day. Um, so it's been, I felt at that time that it was important for me to teach people so they could understand about their local community, especially if they're dealing with Acadians every day and they didn't know about the different dialects and about how the different communities had been very isolated. And they're like, I can't believe that there would be communities where people don't really speak English. And I'm thinking, yeah, I went to high school where I had friends at my lunch table that we didn't like, they didn't speak English. They didn't listen to English TV or English radio, or it was just, that's
Yeah.
all they had was French. And to some people, that's so bizarre, right? Like, how
Yeah.
how could that be in a bilingual province? But it happens. There's definitely communities of folks that are very isolated. So
Yeah. Definitely.
yeah, just like
Wow.
your English communities were very isolated in Nova Scotia, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
well, anyway, have a great evening and thank you again very much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good evening. Hope you feel better.
I hope so too. It's been like a week and a half, so
Oh,
yeah, it's just lingering, but I'm on the mend. All
okay.
right.
Good. Yeah. And
Bye.
just email me if you have follow up questions and
Yeah.
stuff. And you have my email now. So.
Yep, I'll probably send you an email tomorrow, during work hours or so. I know I can hear my kids upstairs screaming now, so
Okay. Sounds good.
all right. Thank
All
you
right.
again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.